Hey, night owls! I got I got a little episode here of I think it's called 363 Baseball Podcast. Or no, this isn't a podcast. You can see my thoughts right now. This is a YouTube series or something. I don't know. I'm trying to replicate the success of people way more forward thinking than me. Like I think I'm about like 12 years late on this. Yeah, I don't know how good my branding's gonna be either. Um, but we'll just push on ahead, man. I got some thoughts about the free agent market. I guess the offseason overall, but particularly pertaining to the free agent market and giving my thoughts about what has become a hot button issue in the ultra important world of Major League Baseball. Because we obviously we have to keep our priorities straight here and talk about baseball free agency. So initially, when it was a slow moving market, and some frustration from fans and columnists started bubbling in December, January, into January. I actually misread the situation a little bit, slightly, because I felt like there's a lot of evidence that pointed to kind of a confluence of circumstances that would be resolved in an uncontroversial fashion, where guys were going to get signed eventually, and we wouldn't have these stories coming out. But furthermore, even beyond journalistic reaction, we've had tension through press releases between the MLBPA and MLB. So, the knives are being sharpened for, or should I say the swords are being sharpened for battles that are going to occur in the future around the next collective bargaining agreement. We've now seen a contextualization of what the major issue is going to be for the next collective bargaining agreement, which is team control. The team having control of a player who has emerged from their farm system in the major leagues for approximately 6 years. That's going to be the major bone of contention. Because what we're seeing now is teams unwilling, not unable, by the way, unwilling. They're definitely able, trust me. Take my word for it. Just look at the TV contracts and everything else, and the Forbes valuations and stuff like that. But teams unwilling to give enormous contracts to players in their 30s, and unless they're an all-star caliber player, which actually Thomas Boswell, who's a great baseball writer, and Why Time Begins on Opening Day is my favorite Boswell collection of essays that I actually first read when I was a lad, and I still have it. I still have that copy, actually, and he's put out other essay collections on baseball. But he had a great philosophy, or that's probably not. He had a very concise philosophy on free agency when it first started. Really, I believe it was the early '80s. But he said, "Guy's a Hall of Famer. You go get him. If he's an All-Star, you should probably get him, but not every single time, depending on how old he is, what type of player he is." Because first baseman could be an all-star, but he could also be a large man, likely to possibly physically break down, especially without the athleticism that would come with being, a shortstop or center fielder. So like those kinds of things. But there's only like a very very small percentage of players that you just relentlessly pursue as free agents, which I basically agree with. Although I guess it's debatable. But the thing is contract lengths. I mean, that's the thing. I mean, if you could get every guy for 1 year or 2 years, then of course you're very aggressive. But when it comes to those borderline cases, like a Jacoby Ellsbury, who basically an all-star caliber player when the Yankees signed him, and kind of declined thereafter. He had a good first year, but let's not get into that. I could do a separate episode about Ellsbury and Cano and that whole situation. But Boswell's point was that when you get right down to it, intelligent teams don't build through free agency. They build through organizational depth. They build through having an excellent farm system and player development. Player development sometimes can actually occur at the major league level just as easily as it can occur in the minor league level. I mean, you have an obvious example like Aaron Judge, who blew away his minor league performance, and Gary Sanchez to a degree. Although I feel like the Yankees Double-A park and Trenton flattens offensive performance. So you can't totally kind of extrapolate those numbers for top prospects. But anyway, like even a guy like Jonathan Scope, who the Orioles probably rushed a little bit to the major leagues, but has emerged as an excellent player after offensively getting off to a rough start in his career. I mean, that's major league player development. So it's all about developing players. And that's like Boswell's contention that he like later goes on to outline, but that always stuck out to me, his argument, because it really kind of simplifies something that feels very, very complicated. Like, how do you judge the value of a free agent? How much, what kind of value do you tack on to a guy being freely available in a transactional sense that only involves money and not trading with another team? But I think it's just the fact that dynasties or just sustained periods of excellence just aren't built on primarily on the free agent market. It just doesn't happen. So the thing is, with all those factors going against the value of free agents, and including teams becoming more analytical in their decision making or sabermetrically inclined or whatever you want to call that, whatever you want, think tank, brain power, blah blah blah, whatever you want to really say about it, it becomes evident that for the players to kind of see a payout that is commiserate to the market as it pertains to having their value artificially depressed by being under team control, massively depressed by being under team control for the first 6 years of their career, as is now. You have to cut into that team control. That's what you have to do. You have to cut into team control, and I imagine the big battle is going to be over them wanting to cut that to 3, and the owners not wanting to cut it at all, and hopefully they can settle at 4 and avoid a lockout or a strike a few years down the road. That would be my hope. But just think about how valuable guys would be at 26 as free agents if they come up when they're 22, or God, the best players when they come up at 21 or even 20 being free agents at 24. You could see 14-year contracts. So it'd be great for the union. I think this direction that the sport needs to go. The interesting thing about what has happened with free agency in this particular offseason is like I said, I kind of missed it. Had I been a columnist or whatever writing about this, I would have missed it, because I thought a lot of what I was reading initially was alarmist, and still possibly could be interpreted that way, because I think these guys are still going to get, Hosmer and Martinez, they're maybe not going to get exactly what they desire, and it's highly debatable whether they're worth exactly what they desire. But in the sense that it has led to legitimate tension, yes, I was wrong on that. I would not have expected that. And the funny thing is just the odd way something can become apparent to you. I'm almost talking about like an intellectual process right now, where coming into this offseason, I hadn't thought about team control in such a way, whether the 6-year team control current setup was sustainable. If someone had put that question to me, I would have had to think about it, because there's an inherent aspect, again, that's totally unfair to the player. But in order for a professional sports league to work, not even so much for a competitive balance, which I feel is just such a term, but for it to even make sense. I mean, for it to make sense for a fan who's interested in it, where you don't have a guy debuting on a team in his rookie year and then jumping after 1 year. I don't know how, like, if that happens in soccer or football. I don't know what their rules are, but the point is, as it pertains to player labor and management practices and value and all that, you're never gonna end competitive balance, which again I feel is extremely overblown as an issue, and is usually just used as a signifier from the owner to the fans that what they're trying to do in depressing salaries is for the greater benefit of the sport. I mean, I'm not going to sit here and say that there's absolutely nothing to that, but I think there's close to nothing to it. But in the weird, and I'm only saying this is a caveat to what I'm saying. This is like a digression from my main point. Just in sports, it's a weird, wacky world. The world of sports and the world of, a guy trying to get his overtime money that he deserves, as a labor issue or raising minimum wage and stuff like that. That's the real world. The sports world is a strange world that's 30 teams or more trying to make something that, makes sense for people to follow. So you kind of almost have to suspend your disbelief, even ironically, not even just as a fan or a columnist, even as someone who works for the MLBPA, in the sense that, like, in the next labor agreement, if you're going totally, like, let's totally make this a free market situation, team control would last for like a year. But it's just not. And maybe it'll happen one day, but it's probably not like a realistic starting point for negotiations. But that's the funny thing. This offseason has really illuminated a point for me that whole 6-year control thing doesn't work. And the last thing I'm going to say, I got to put my glasses on for a minute because I want to make sure. Okay, I'm at 12 minutes. These videos can't be longer than 15 minutes because editing the last one together was a goddamn nightmare. So I'm not making them longer than 15 minutes because that's all I can post on YouTube right now. The last thing I want to say that I just want to make a note of kind of how disturbed I am, in a sense. Not, again, talking about the world of sports, right? But just in terms of how binary this conversation is in certain quarters of baseball fandom or column land or whatever the hell you want to call the apparatus of baseball. As I throw a little grad school term at you right there. Yeah, that's such is my life. But anyway, I just see such a binary reaction in the sense where if you have, kind of like a writer like Dan Szymborski, who I've been a fan of for like a very, very long time, going back to his days at BTF, and he's simply arguing that just because the system is unfair, obviously the way that it is right now, it does not justify Eric Hosmer getting an 8-year deal or JD Martinez getting a 6-year deal, which I think is actually more defensible than Eric Hosmer getting an 8-year deal, even though that would probably be a pretty dubious contract too, mainly because he's had injuries already in his 20s and he doesn't have any defensive value really. So, when you have someone like that, it's almost like there's no complexity in arguments just because you might be anti-owner basically down the line on every issue, which basically I am, doesn't mean I'm going to just turn my brain off, hit the off switch, and pretend like Eric Hosmer getting a huge contract justifies the system being unfair, because it doesn't anyway. Even if Eric Hosmer gets an 8-year deal, it doesn't mean that the system works. And I'm explaining why it doesn't work right now based on 6-year arbitration. And, already it hasn't worked for players. I mean, how did free agency work for Kendrys Morales and Steven Drew a few years ago when they were both coming off really good years and couldn't get decent contracts because they had compensation picks attached to them, but also because of their age, because they were hitting free agency at a particular time in their career. you know, and that's the thing.